Since the inception of video games themselves, they've often been set in our historical past, based on different themes, settings, and time periods. Games like the 1971 Oregon Trail, the first Civilization game released in 1991, Battlefield 1942 in 2002, and to our current time with leading historical franchises such as Total War.
We'll find you acting on your best behavior. Turn your back on Mother Nature. Everybody walks through.
The historical Total War games and others like it use interesting conflicts and time periods in history to provide an engaging experience for players. And while historically accurate games are more likely than not to be in the strategy genre, they can come in all shapes and sizes. It's usually not the desire of developers or players to have a game that simulates the boring misery of World War I trench warfare over fun gunfights. And this is fine. My goal here is not to criticize the choices of game companies and how historically accurate a game is, but rather to show the power that video games hold in teaching history. One of the biggest pieces of evidence for why video games are so effective at this is because they can put you into these environments and time periods and have you experience it yourself. Not only will experiencing something directly give you a greater understanding of it than just being told about it, but let me give you an example. Let's say you wanted to learn about the experience of bomber crews in World War II. Would you choose to learn about it like this, or like this?
Jimmy, I can see him, boy. Good show. I can see him now. Yeah, I see him burning. Does he look lovely? Good show, lads. Now keep your eyes on that one. Okay, now then, lads.
What you just saw was a VR game experience created by the BBC and their media applications department. And it's companies like the BBC that are understanding the powerful tool that is video games in the world of education. Just look at their other experience.
Don't worry, it'll all get a lot easier on the arm.
In cases such as these, it's not necessarily that video game experiences can replace traditional education, but they can supplement it. And in another fashion, video games can encourage education and foster curiosity amongst players. Speaking a bit anecdotally here, when I was younger, I played a game called Age of Mythology. It's a lesser-known real-time strategy game, especially with the existence of its sister franchise, Age of Empires, but Age of Mythology did something for me.
Πρόσεχε, μάλιστα. Θηρευτής.
This game sent me on a multiple year-long journey as a child where I tried to read as many books on Greek mythology and ancient Greece that I could get my hands on. This is because Age of Mythology's gameplay is separated by the 4 different categories it covers: Greek mythology, Norse folklore, and the Egyptian mythos, followed by a later added subcategory of the Greeks, Titans. On top of each of these mythologies being fully fleshed out in-game factions with unique units and so forth, each one had its own campaign and story that told a fictionalized series of events that introduced the player to every mythology and their subsequent backgrounds. And in the words of how one commenter put this is not only a game, this is an encyclopedia. You play and educate yourself. One of the best games ever. What they mean by this is that every single character, creature, and unit in the game has their own accessible panel of text that describes what it is, where the myth or legend originated from, and of course, any game-related tips. This kind of readily available info is even intertwined with the gameplay. As you progress in a match, you must choose the next god to worship to unlock new units, abilities, and upgrades at 4 different tiers. And even here you can see that the developers have included a brief note about what these gods were and what they represented. All of this to say that Age of Mythology is one of those games where players got a subtle educational experience alongside the fun of playing it. And now, like me, a subset of the game's audience went on to pursue more learning beyond Age of Mythology. And speaking for myself, I know way too much about it now. So what this often means is that whether or not a game is explicitly about teaching history or is merely including historical elements, it irregardless can easily lead to an educational experience. and if not that, at least a jumping off point for those who get interested in the topics. But I want to remind you that I'm simply arguing that video games can be a very effective tool in teaching history. However, that doesn't always mean it's positive. Here's the thing, video games can also use their platforms to mislead audiences as well. And I want to break this down into a few categories: the negative, the neutral, and the noteworthy. Starting with the negative, and likely the most well known on the topic of historical accuracy, Battlefield 5.
Hello, old friend.
This game, described by the developers as a dive into the major conflicts of World War II and its lesser-known battles, ended up causing a divide the franchise has not seen before. Battlefield 5, with its katana-wielding soldiers, robotic arms, and a distinct lack of respect for what actually happened, paints a distasteful picture of the biggest conflict in our history. I heavily recommend reading this article by the Washington Post that details why this is. Then you have games like Company of Heroes 2, who proudly boast of their historical accuracies, but show scenes in the campaign that are unfounded in historical documents.
There, my Polish friend. All that you bargained for and more besides. The Red Army knows how to take care of its friends. These Poles were capitalists and thieves. Once the Germans were gone, the Poles would have been fighting us. And we have been at war far too long.
So when you have games like these two, who present themselves as authentic and who end up having millions of players, it leads to wholly irresponsible levels of misleading that potential generations of people will believe. But I digress. Moving on to the neutral category, we have games that balance that fine line between pulling from historical elements and also making it understood that they aren't meant to be mirrors of history, but rather artistic interpretations. While these games can be problematic, especially in cases such as Battlefield 1 and Assassin's Creed, where they tie such a sheer amount of history with their interpretation that it definitely blurs the lines for more impressionable audiences, ultimately, these games, their developers, and the use of their visual medium aren't trying to deceive you. In fact, games in this category can still inspire players to educate themselves on the real events. Finally, our noteworthy category, with certain games from the Total War franchise, Steel Division, and Age of Empires 4. Since I've already given Total War its spot, and throughout this video I've been playing footage of the game Warno, the Steel Division developer's next game, I want to talk about Age of Empires 4. Age of Empires 4 did something incredible. The developers tied in their own in-house created docu-series alongside the game's multiple campaigns that span the global medieval period. Take a look.
At 9 o'clock in the morning, on this hill, William's Norman army were ready to do battle with Harold's Anglo-Saxon men. The stage was set, and up for grabs, England itself.
Between each set piece of the campaigns, these docu-style videos play and introduce the player in a historical fashion to the battle that they're about to engage with. This is an extremely effective way to intertwine historical education with a fun video game, and I loved every second of it. In conclusion, while video games may not always be purely authentic in their visual representations of history, most of the time this is okay, and it's easy to see why video games can be such a powerful tool to teach history. Thanks for watching.